you, Daisy, and I'm afraid tonight I'm not going to talk about the court case for once, but if anybody else ever does want to read about that, if you Google me, I'm probably being taken to court. So Laura McInerney taken to court, you can learn more about it. But tonight instead, we're going to be talking about the future of education and actually what's a big idea for how it might change. I am going to share my screen and some slides here just so that you've got a little bit of illustration as we go along, because I am the co-founder of two apps, TeacherTap and Parent Ping. Tonight going to be talking specifically about schools and an idea that started back in 2019 and has come back again, so I want to share it with you. Just so you're aware, Teacher Tapp is an app that any teacher can be on, predominantly in the UK, although we have some other countries as well. It's free to download. If you are a teacher, please do. And it means you can take part in research each day. It asks 3 questions, might be as simple as where you had your lunch, or it might be something about the children, perhaps their behavior, what they were learning. And it's meant that over the pandemic, every single day, we were able to find out about what was happening in school, if school was open, or at home, if children were at home. And we've learned a ton. Tonight, we could have talked about AI, could be talking about online platforms, could be talking about how homework has changed. But instead, I'm going to go for an idea that I actually first raised in 2019. And it's a set of numbers, a set of numbers that drives almost everything about school education here in the UK and in many other parts of the world as well. And those numbers are these: 9 till 3:30. 9 till 3:30, 9 roughly when schools start. If you're in a school, yours might be 8, 8:30, and again, some finish at 3 or 3:15. But roughly, if you look across the UK, the majority of schools are open for 6.5 hours from 9 till 3:30. And when my friends who had children started to realise this, they phoned me and they would say, Laura, what am I supposed to do with my kids at 9 till 3:30? I need to be in work before 9 and I can't pick them up at 3:30. They found it outrageous that this were the hours of schools. And of course, it makes a lot of sense. In a world right now where I can have Amazon bring my shopping, something as simple as my groceries in a couple of hours, or I can go to the DIY store and get paint in exactly the colour that I'm expecting it to be in, we think that our services should be convenient at the very least and customizable ideally. And yet schools, 9 till 3:30, you don't get to pick the time, you don't get to pick what's going on around it, 9 till 3:30. And so I started to think about whether this could change. But the problem is that schools are a little bit like factories. And I don't mean this in a stereotypical sense. You often hear people, especially on talks like this, and maybe some of the speakers will say it later, but the idea that schools are assembly lines, that they're just there to put out identikit children. I don't think that's true, actually. We don't have a kind of onward churn of children all the time. But what schools are, if we're being honest in our heart of hearts, and I was a teacher, so I say this as someone who took part in it, schools are batch managers. Often as a teacher, you don't really teach individual children, you teach whole classes. And as a school, one of the logistical problems is how do you get 1,500 children in the door at the same time? How do you put them into classes? How do you move them around a school in an efficient way? And at the end of the day, how do you get them out? And if anybody thought that wasn't a huge part of what happens in schools, we only have to look at all of the logistical efforts that have gone in over the past year to make sure that children can move around the school or be timetabled in a safe and efficient manner. So 9 to 3:30 isn't some awful thing that schools have concocted to be mean. It's simply a way of ensuring efficiently that children are getting their schooling. It doesn't necessarily work anymore, though. Now, I realize that there are some people sitting, if you're listening right now, you might be thinking, well, it works for me. I like being able to work in the day and have my children go away. It was a real pain when schools were closed. And actually, I quite like picking my children up at 3:30. I strongly believe that children shouldn't go to school any longer. And when I've said before now that school should go on for longer, a lot of people will say to me, my child will be too tired, my child will be too hungry. That's fine. I'm okay with that idea that it's not for everybody. But still, 9 till 3:30. It is a public service failure when lots and lots of people who want to get their children educated simply cannot make it work around this timing. And let's just take some simple examples. I'm an optician, I work in a shop, that shop is open till 5:30 p.m. What is my child doing between 3:30 when they finish school and the time when I have to work? If I'm lucky, I'm able to pay for them to go somewhere, but a lot of the time, actually, children just have dead time. They're either wandering around, they're on their own, they're at home without adults, or they're being shoved from pillar to post. Let's take another example. People who run hotels or who work in the hospitality industry. In fact, any of the around 25% of adults in the UK who work some part of the weekend. If you work in a weekend and school holidays, when do you see your children? There are people whose entire industry makes it very, very difficult for them to spend quality time with their children. And instead, what they do is they take their children out of school during term time to have time with them. How do we know that? Well, we can see it in the attendance records around the country of rural and tourism areas. But also we saw in the pandemic, those areas that have lots of tourism, actually their attendance went up during the pandemic because the children weren't being taken out to go on holiday with their parents because their parents were around during the holidays. So this is a real thing. It has an impact on absences. And so I started to think a few years ago and write about the idea that perhaps, what if some schools, not all of them, but some schools had flexible learning? What if it was possible, say, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday that children go to school, and then they take home some lessons Thursday to Friday, which can be done online. But instead of doing them on the Thursday and Friday, they could do them on the Saturday and Sunday, and their parents could see them on the Thursday and the Friday. What if there were some schools where they packed everything in on a longer day, Monday to Thursday, and it meant that every weekend their parents could see their children Friday, Saturday and Sunday because perhaps they were away for those other 4 days and they missed out on lots of bedtime. So I thought, what if some schools had flexible learning? And I got laughed at. I got absolutely roundly laughed at. I wrote this in an article in 2019 for the Centre for Education and Youth, and so many people came to me and they said, oh, Laura, that's such a nice idea. It's a great idea, but frankly, it just isn't possible. There's simply no way that we could create a school system where some children are in school and some children are out of school and they're learning the same things. It just isn't possible that teachers could try and teach from home or teach children remotely. It isn't possible, they said, until, of course, it was. And last March in the UK, schools closed. They were given 48 hours notice and the children had to go home. And many schools grappled together and they managed to make various types of online learning work. But in particular, one of the most successful was a group run by Oak National Academy, funded by the government and given a lot of money to pull together an online video curriculum. Now, not only did this mean that children could learn from anywhere at home, but actually when they came back to school in the September and children were in and out because they were in bubbles and they had to get tests, and if it was thought you had COVID, you had to stay at home. The UK brought in the legal requirements that children in school and out of school must be able to have the same lessons. And it meant for a period of time, if any child was at home for any reason, whether they were in hospital with a broken leg, whether their whether their house was snowed in, whether they had to get on a plane and go to see a family member who was very, very sick on the other side of the world, those children were all able to access their curriculum just the same as the children in school. And now it wasn't a funny question anymore. It wasn't what if some schools had flexible learning. It was what if schools had to have flexible learning, every single one of them. And of course, it's been incredibly challenging. I can see from the data that teachers don't love this. Given the choice, the vast majority prefer to be in school. But we also know from Teacher Tapp, from asking teachers day by day about their experiences, that there are around 8% of teachers who would prefer their job to be resource creation. That there is a small percentage, around the same number, 8 to 10% of teachers who would like to work remotely, doing remote learning all of the time. And there's another group of teachers, around 30%, who would happily have hybrid, some of the week at home, some of the week away. And so I have to think again, 9 till 3:30. Is that genuinely the best that we could do? Or can we think like the DIY store? Can we think like Amazon? And at least in some schools, can we think about convenience and customization? Is it possible that schools could add on hours so that it would always be possible for a parent to be able to select extra hours for their child for free and make sure they're engaged, not necessarily in school time, but at least in additional learning, at least in making sure that those young people have access to youth clubs, to their peers in a safe environment? Is it possible that we could have any day schools, a school where they say you have to come and turn up for 3 days a week, but the rest of your work could be done on any day, and enable those families who otherwise don't see their children because they work on weekends to have time with them? And could we have online schools? Not every school doing this, but at least some, so that children with long-term illnesses or those who fly backwards and forwards between different countries for a variety of reasons are able to continue their education, and it doesn't have to be done in a disrupted way. Ultimately, the new education story needs to be just like with workplaces, not just if we had flexible working, but what if schools had flexible learning, because it will enable more families and more children to make sure they're accessing education and time together. And I honestly think if the school sector doesn't do this, then ultimately other businesses and other private endeavours will start to peel it away, and we will lose as a state sector some of the great flexibilities that have enabled families to work, to educate their children exactly as they want to for many, many years. Thank you.